In today's episode, we look at a ruthless gang who arrange fake meets on Grindr and then threaten and kidnap their victims to extort over £100,000 in 10 months using violence. It was not just dating apps. They would make out they was injured or pretend to be a stranded motorist broken down to snare their victims. They would also kidnap victims from nightclubs. We deep dive the case, the police investigation, and the trial. In recent years, the joining of technology and crime has become increasingly evident, with online dating and hookup apps being exploited by criminal elements. In 2023 and 2024, a chilling crime wave swept across Birmingham and Derby in the United Kingdom. At the centre of this campaign of violence and theft were 5 men: Damal Jihadza, Abu Akil al-Lazawi, Ali Hussain, Wasim Amar, and Mohammed Sharif, dubbed the Grindr Gang by the media. The 5 men began orchestrating a series of robberies by exploiting the dating app. They created fake profiles to lure unsuspecting victims to meetings under the pretense of romantic or casual encounters. Once the victims arrived at the designated locations, often secluded areas like parks or quiet streets, they were ambushed by the gang. The assailants used various tactics to incapacitate their victims, including physical violence and intimidation with weapons. Victims were forced to surrender personal belongings such as wallets, mobile phones and car keys. In some instances, the gang coerced victims into transferring large sums of money from their bank accounts. The attacks were meticulously planned, with the perpetrators often concealing their identities using masks or face coverings to avoid recognition. In April 2023, reports of violent robberies began to surface. The gang's victims were typically invited to secluded locations, such as parks and quiet streets, under the pretext of a date. Upon arrival, the victims were ambushed by multiple assailants. The gang often used weapons and overwhelming physical force to subdue their victims, ensuring compliance through fear and violence. In an attack that took place on April 27, 2023, involving all 5 of the gang, a male victim was targeted on Grindr, who was lured to Golden Hillock Park in Birmingham. The victim had unknowingly been messaged by a fake account for 4 weeks prior to being attacked, showing how well established and planned this gang was. The victim said how 4 of the 5 men had their faces covered. He recalled them using mobile phones to speak to other people in a foreign language. The incident lasted 2 hours. The victim was told to stay in the park for an hour after the robbers left, otherwise he would be stabbed. He had his car stolen and more than £6,000 taken from his bank accounts. Another attack involved a man targeted on Grindr at the same park. He was pinned to the ground, causing his shoulder to become dislocated. The robbers were wearing balaclavas. His phone was taken from him. It was held to his face to unlock his banking apps. They threatened to punch or stab him. The victim had more than £10,000 stolen from his bank accounts. In another incident, the men pretended their car had broken down in Derby, and when 2 members of the public went to assist them, they were assaulted and robbed. In most of the attacks, the suspects concealed their identity with masks or face coverings, or held their victims down with their faces in the mud to prevent them from being able to identify them. An attack in Derby where 2 men were targeted on April 25, 2023. They were threatened with an 8-inch long knife. 8 hours after arriving back in Birmingham, Al-Azawi sent a picture of another potential victim to Sharif. The message said, "Guy lives alone," and look at his neck, in relation to a necklace he was wearing. Al-Azawi told Sharif the target male had been told to meet him at 7 p.m. that day. It is unknown if this man was robbed. He has never reported the incident, and his profile cannot be found. Footage showed the gang at cash points where they'd withdraw sums of money. They'd also attend shops to spend the money using stolen cards, and were seen celebrating outside a shop. Victims described being punched, kicked and restrained. The injuries ranged from bruises to severe fractures, including broken noses and dislocated shoulders. In some cases, the gang held victims captive for hours, coercing them into transferring money through mobile banking apps. Stolen items included wallets, watches, phones, and even vehicles. The calculated brutality of these attacks demonstrated a clear pattern of premeditation and disregard for human dignity. As spring then turned to summer, the Grindr gang's activities escalated. Between May and August 2023, the frequency of the attacks increased, as did their audacity. Birmingham's Golden Hillock Park became a hotspot for their operations. Victims reported being surrounded by masked men who would intimidate, rob, and beat them. An attack had taken place on May the 11th, 2023 at Golden Hillock Park. The male victim was out in the early hours of the morning because he couldn't sleep. The victim was asked for help by a man who claimed his mother had been stabbed. But when he went into the park, he was attacked and threatened with a knife. The robbers said to him, "Why do you like boys?" The victim was recorded during the incident and made to address a girl's name, saying, "I love you." His phone was held to his face to unlock it. The victim and cash jewellery in his jacket was taken, as well as nearly £1,500 stolen from his account. An attack took place on May the 12th, 2023, involving another male at Golden Hillock Park, after being targeted on Grindr. He was made to shout expletives how he wants girls, around 100 times during the incident. In total, the victim had nearly £17,000 stolen from him. Another male victim was attacked at Golden Hillock Park on May the 28th, 2023, after being lured there through Grindr. The victim had his van stolen, as well as more than £5,000 from his account. At one point, his jacket was removed and used to tie up his feet. In a statement, the victim outlined the fear he felt due to knowing that the robbers knew where he lived. The gang's tactics also diversified. They began targeting individuals outside nightclubs and bars, posing as helpful strangers offering lifts or assistance. Once isolated, the victims were attacked and robbed. In one attack, the victim was targeted at Reflex nightclub in Broad Street. He believed his drink was spiked as he started to feel woozy. The victim was speaking to a male in the smoking area of the club who offered him a lift home. But when he got into the car, the other robbers were there. At one point, the gang had stopped at a shop to spend some of his money stolen from him. The victim recalled getting out before one of the defendants put his arm around him and said he had no choice but to get back inside. The next thing he remembered was waking up on the living room floor of his flat with the attackers surrounding him. He was asked to go outside and sit in a vehicle. In total, the robbery lasted 12.5 hours before he was allowed to leave, which was when he walked to a police station. He had around £2,500 stolen from his accounts, as well as a large amount of cryptocurrency, worth £18,000 at the time. The psychological toll of these encounters cannot be overstated, with many victims reporting long-term trauma and an inability to trust others. The crimes of the Grindr gang sent shockwaves through the community. Grindr, a platform intended for connection and inclusion, was weaponised against its users. Many victims reported feeling unsafe and hesitant to use dating apps in the aftermath of the attacks. The broader community expressed anger and frustration at exploitation and their trust and lack of safety in public spaces. Another man contacted on Grindr was robbed by Omar and Al-Uzawi at Golden Hillock Park on July the 11th, 2023. He was dragged to the ground, kicked and punched. His face was pushed in the mud to prevent him seeing anything. He did see that both attackers were wearing balaclavas. He was warned he would be stabbed if he moved. The robbery lasted around 50 minutes. The victim feigned illness, which led to the attackers returning his phone. They had stolen nearly £5,000 from him. Activists and organisations called for increased security measures on dating apps. Police also pledged to improve their response to crimes targeting marginalised communities. The case highlighted the need for vigilance, both online and offline, to protect vulnerable individuals from exploitation. By late 2023, law enforcement agencies were under significant pressure to solve the cases. Police began piecing together evidence from victim statements, CCTV footage, financial records, and forensic analysis of phones and vehicles. Detectives discovered that the gang's operations were highly organised. They used disposable phones and multiple Grindr accounts to avoid detection. The stolen money was often laundered through cryptocurrency or transferred to offshore accounts. However, their increasing confidence led to mistakes. Traces of DNA, digital footprints, and eyewitness accounts began to build a compelling case against the perpetrators. Another attack took place on February the 5th, 2024, and involved Alizawi, as well as a second unknown robber. The victim was contacted through Grindr and was attacked at a different park, close to where Alizawi lived at the time. He was punched and kicked multiple times, and he was threatened if he moved, he'd be sliced. The incident lasted 45 minutes in total. The two robbers asked how his family felt about him being gay. He got the impression that the men who used Grindr were easy prey. The victim had £10,000 stolen from him. He suffered a fractured eye socket, deviated septum, bruising and wounds. In March 2024, police made a breakthrough. The 5 members of the Grindr gang were identified and arrested in coordinated operations across Birmingham and Derby. Damarji Hadza, Abu Bakr al-Azawi, Ali Hussain, Wasim Omar and Mohammed Sharif were charged with conspiracy to commit robbery, assault and hate crimes. The trial began in September 2024 at Birmingham Crown Court with Judge Buckingham. Prosecutors outlined the gang's deliberate targeting of gay men, emphasising the hate crime element of their actions. Witness testimonies painted a harrowing picture of the physical and emotional toll inflicted by the gang. The court also heard evidence of the gang's financial motivations, with over £100,000 stolen over the course of their crime spree. Judge Buckingham said the prosecution does necessarily need to establish motive, but in this case the motive was clear: to steal substantial sums of money from the victims' mobile phone banking apps. You selected your victims. They were all vulnerable, all alone, tricked or lured to a spot where they were ambushed and robbed. She confirms the offence of conspiracy to rob was a hate crime in this case, due to the gratuitous abuse and insults. Some of you appear to have curious fascination by asking one victim about being gay. She states the gang made assumptions about their victims. The judge continues these assumptions were wrong. Assumptions they would not report what happened to them, or come to court out of shame and embarrassment. They did come to court with dignity and bravery. Many were shockingly assaulted, and some were humiliated. They come to court to ensure justice is done. Those men have nothing to be ashamed of. All of you, on the other hand, do. On January 13, 2025, the 5 men were sentenced to a combined total of nearly 80 years in prison. Damarji Hadza, 21 years old, was sentenced to 16 years and 2 months imprisonment. Abu Bakr al-Azawi, 21 years old, was sentenced to 16 years and 5 months imprisonment. Ali Hassan, 20 years old, was sentenced to 16 years and 9 months imprisonment. Wasim Omar, 24 years old, was sentenced to 17 years and 3 months imprisonment. Mohammed Sharif, 23 years old, was sentenced to 12 years imprisonment. The judge highlighted the gang's targeting of vulnerable individuals and the calculated nature of their crimes. The sentences reflected the severity of their actions and the lasting impact on the victims. Judge Buckingham said each defendant presented a helpful and responsible image of their families while considering an entirely different side. There is no explanation why you considered it necessary to be so cruel. You prolonged the detention of those men. There is no explanation for your taunting and use of hostility. Why? There's no explanation. You formed a toxic group, feeding and encouraging each other, apparently thinking you had got away with your crime. You were emboldened. Detective Inspector Tom Lyons from West Midlands Police Major Crime Unit said, "I know it took the victims in this case a huge amount of bravery and courage to come forward and support the criminal justice process through the trial, and I commend them for doing so. Their evidence enabled us to launch a full-scale investigation and build a strong case, which ultimately brought the offenders to justice, and has undoubtedly prevented many other people from becoming a victim. I hope today's outcome provides reassurance that we take these types of offences extremely seriously and always do everything in our power to bring offenders to justice. Those found committing offences like this can expect to face a considerable length of time in prison. Dating and romance scammers lower their targets' defences by building an online relationship, then asking for larger and larger sums of money. Well-meaning men and women have both fallen victim to this. The exploitation of dating apps by criminal gangs is not new, and it's happening across the world, as we've seen by this case. It underscores the need for heightened awareness and proactive measures to ensure safety. While these platforms offer opportunities for people to connect, users must remain vigilant and adopt safety practices to protect themselves from potential harm. Dating app companies have also a role to play in enhancing user safety with better verification processes and aware of suspicious account behaviour that can help protect users. What pulled me to this case is how easy it was to rob the victims using their own phones. In my opinion, this gang were dangerous, very dangerous, and I think it was only a matter of time before a victim received injuries they would not walk away from. The taunting of the victims while they were held captive I found cowardly and sickening, and their sentences were harsh and good on the judge for jailing these muppets. They showed remorse when caught, but laughed and joked after robbing victims. The pretending to be broken down and robbing anyone who helped reminded me of highway robbers who would lie in wait and use distraction of being hurt or in trouble. It declined in the late 18th century mainly due to the Bow Street Horse Patrol actively targeting highwaymen after 1763, refusing to license inns and taverns that provided highwaymen with sanctuary, and the continued urbanisation leading to few isolated stretches of road. What also brought it to an end was the development of banking and people carrying less money. Now we carry no money and our banks are all on our phone. Is this the start of a new crime wave?